and to talk a little bit about them and what unites them. The two books are Transcendence, Healing and Transformation Through Transcendental Meditation, and Winter Blues, Everything You Know to Beat Seasonal Affective Disorder. And these two books share a lot in common because both of them were inspired originally by a key patient of mine who sent me on a journey of discovery that really changed my life. 30 years ago, a person who had regular depressions in the winter, in the autumn, when the days got short and dark, made me wonder, are there other people like that out there? And indeed, there are millions of people. And it hadn't been recognized before. And I realized I was one of them. I am one of them. And helped to figure out how to combat the condition with bright light therapy and many other things. So I brought out Winter Blues to describe all my experience and to share it, because not everybody can come and visit me in my own home office. And so this is one way whereby I can get my knowledge out to everybody out there who wants to know about it. And then many years later, quite recently, another patient came along. And he said to me, he is bipolar, and he said to me, you know, your medicines are fine, but what's really making me happy is Transcendental Meditation. And I said, oh, you know, I did that long ago when the Beatles went to visit Maharishi in the late 60s, and it was the early 70s, and I was a medical student, and we all kind of thought it was the kind of cool and what we used to say then, and I don't think anybody uses the word anymore, we thought it was groovy. I don't think anybody knows what groovy is anymore, but it was really just one of those things you had to do. And then I kind of let it drop because, you know, that's what you do with groovy things. You do them and then you go and do something else. But he says, you know, you should get back to it. And I did. I got back to it. And I personally have found transformation in a lot of ways through this technique. And so in both cases, I brought this quotes discovery, because I didn't discover light and I didn't discover transcendence, but it was like, you know how you discover a new restaurant? And of course the restaurant's been around, you didn't discover it, but it's wow, now I know it's here and I can tell all my friends about it. So I discovered these two things for myself and I'm happy to share it out. It's hard to know when something becomes a part of your daily life. What is it doing for you? Because what does breakfast do for me? I don't know. I eat it every day. I never go without it. So I really wouldn't know how it would be, but I don't think I would feel as good. And I don't think I would feel as good without my meditation. I know I wouldn't, because sometimes by happenstance I have to skip and I always end up regretting it. I feel the difference. I feel when I've got that transcendent calm feeling, it's with me all day long. And I feel it and it emanates from you when you're calm, and other people respond to it. They pick it up and somehow they're nicer to you. In Transcendence, I've got the story of this horrible felon. He was a horrible felon, a murderer and heavens knows what all else. And he was just ready to stick a knife in your ribs if you looked at him the wrong way. And in the prison system in California, he learned Transcendental Meditation, and bit by bit it turned him around, gave him those few extra seconds. You heard one of the people saying, gives you those few extra seconds. If somebody looks at you the wrong way, you can say, that's a very funny story of a little kid, of a colleague of mine, a young patient, and he says, my friend said to him, what's the difference since you've been meditating? He says, you know, before I was meditating, if somebody bumped me in the hall, I would hit him. Now somebody bumps me in the hall, I say to myself, should I hit him or not? Just those few seconds to ask yourself that question. Well, this felon, going back to him, transformed his life, got out by a miracle, got out of jail, because he was supposed to be there for the rest of his days. But because he turned himself around so much, he got out of jail. And what he said is, you know, I thought the world was a mean and nasty place. But you know, I was the mean and nasty person. And when I stopped being that way, the world stopped being that way. The world, we often experience the world, as it says in the Talmud, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And that is how meditation changes your world. It changes you, and when you get changed, people respond to you in a different way. Well, the best sad lamps are not blue. They are white light. And I knew that I would personally have difficulty here in London. And one of the purveyors of very good sad lamps, and I'd be very happy to say it's the Sad Light Company, loaned me 2 of these lights that I've been using every morning. And honestly, it's been a tonic. My energy and my vibrancy have been way up as a result of using these lights. So firstly, I would say get a proper light that's a decent size, because the size is important. It should be white fluorescent light, because that's where the data is, and that's where the safety data is. And it will give you more energy and vibrancy in most cases. As to the cold, that's like a different sort of thing. I don't think it's going to warm you up. It's not like a fire or the sun. It doesn't have the infrared part, which is the warming part. You'd have to do that with a sweater, heater, something else.
Do you think that's any part of it? Because if you think the people who live in the north and or the extremes of the planet who get less sunlight will possibly also get less warmth. Do you think there's a...
You know, I used to think so, but now I don't think there is enough data. What I would seriously recommend is that you get your vitamin D levels checked. Those can be measured, and that there are normative values for vitamin D, and it's vitamin D3, or as you all say, vitamin D. It's the same thing, and be sure you get enough of it, because that most of us are deficient, and it is sunlight dependent. You don't get enough sunlight, and so it's an important thing to monitor.
I was fascinated by the connection between winter and creativity, and it was unexpected for me. And were you suggesting that winter might be a creative time if the dysphoria can be allayed effectively, and that it would be a more reflective time of the year and a more creative time of the year?
Winter is a wonderfully reflective time. You know, it's a time to retreat into the self. And in the long nights of winter, what happens is sleep can break into different components. And in the middle between those 2 components is a time of natural transcendence. But the other thing that's worth thinking about is that we often are very creative when we undergo shifts in states of consciousness. When you are in your waking state, that's one state of consciousness. When you meditate with TM and go into a transcendent state, it's a different state of consciousness, and other ideas will kind of come to mind. And people who go from the rapid, thoughts racing, active, energized state of summer and move into a reflective state of winter can find that each of these different states of being and states of awareness bring their own gifts. And when you combine these gifts together, sometimes you get the most creative effects. You go into your transcendent state, ideas bubble up, you finish your meditation, you go run and write them down, and they become the basis for a poem or a book or a novel or whatever. And likewise, in the summer you might get many, many ideas, and then in the winter, in a more reflective mode, you might kind of put them together and begin to shape them and fashion them into a completed creative work. So shifts in states of consciousness are very valuable for the creative process, because we see things. Creativity involves seeing things in different ways. And There's a very funny piece that Woody Allen writes about how the Earl of Sandwich invented the sandwich, and the Earl of Sandwich the symptoms. But if you're on an island where there's a lot of cloud and not a lot of snow, that is a harder environment for somebody who is so sensitive to the lack of light. Prevalence, of course, depends on how you define your cases. When you've got a bacterium, like diphtheria, it's very easy to diagnose prevalence. When you've got something where you have to have some measurement, then it's harder. But I would rate the prevalence where I am in the mid-Atlantic area of the United States, around Washington, D.C., at about 5% of people with severe symptoms, bad enough to warrant going to the doctor, and another, say, 15% with mild symptoms, where it's not like it lays you low that you can't get out of bed, but you're not as creative, you're not as productive, life just isn't as much fun. And you know, in America, we have in our Constitution that we have the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. The pursuit of happiness is actually enshrined, and I like that. I think we shouldn't just be well, we should be happy. We should be the best we can be. So I think it's very important to recognize that you don't have to be one of those hardcore SAD people to benefit from some of the things, which is why I've called it winter blues, because even those that are blue can benefit from some of these things. Well, you know, I actually am not really an aficionado in the Ayurvedic tradition. Know a little bit about it, but there are, of course, ancient ways of dealing with the seasons. There's the Chinese Book of Changes, the Nei Ching, that says that in the winter you should go to sleep early and you should wake late. There are traditions that suggest that you shouldn't oppose the seasons, you should kind of go with the seasons. Maybe in a more Western tradition, you know, somebody said everybody complains about the weather but nobody does anything about it. Well, in the Western tradition, often we try to do something about it. And what we do is we bring light into our rooms so that we try and replace what is missing. And but some of it is going with it, because I can tell you that even with all the things that one might do, winter never feels like summer. It's always different. You know, to move from one space to another and see light and colors, and the colors of flowers and the aromas of the flowers and the buzzing of the bees. And who can duplicate that? Certainly not a light box. So it never feels the same, and spring always feels like an awakening. And it should. But at least the worst of that down feeling can be ameliorated to a huge degree. And that's a relief for all of us who experience it. Not everybody does. Whenever I've been on the radio about winter depression, people will always call in and say, you know, I love the winter, I hate the summer. And that's what's wonderful about human beings. We're all wired so differently. We love and hate different things, and that's what makes us all so interesting, because we're all so different.
So have you located what the different wiring is? The individuals, some who experience this as another day?
It's a really, really good question. We have done many studies comparing the biology of people with SAD and people without SAD, and there are many differences. I'll give you an interesting little study we did. People with SAD say, I cannot stop munching on, we would call it cookies in America, but you would call it biscuits. I love cake, I love biscuits, I love bread, I love carbohydrates. So we thought, well, what's the difference between how people with SAD respond to carbohydrates and people without don't, you know? And the difference is that a carbohydrate-rich meal will sedate most people, but it activates people with SAD, which is just what they feel they need. So they have these biscuits and they have these cakes and they feel energized, Only trouble is, it doesn't last very long. Insulin kicks in, sugar plunges, guess what? Back to the fridge for another piece of cake. And then, of course, we all know what that does. So it's not a good strategy, but that's an indication of the biological difference. Now you might say, well, what's the difference at the level of the brain? And there we have evidence that some of the neurotransmitter functions are different: serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and even the hormone melatonin, which the difference was 30 years. When I did it first, I was a very young man. I didn't take it seriously. It was just a fun thing to do. When I did it 30 years later, or more than 30 years later, I don't even want to count, I was not such a young man. And I realized at that time, and my patient kept reminding me incidentally in case I forgot, that anything that you want to have an enduring effect on you, you have to do regularly, which makes sense if you think of it. You know, we used to have these diets that used to last 2 weeks. The pineapple and chicken diet. Do it for 2 weeks and lose 10 pounds and so on and so on. What happens? You gain it all back again. And then we realized that it's no good going on a diet for a week or two. You have to change your style of eating in a sort of sustained way. Or if these people who were weekend golfers, well, that did nothing for them. You have to exercise in a regular way. And so, with the benefit of maturity, I understood, and my patient didn't stop reminding me, that I needed to do it regularly. As he said, how would it be if I took my medicines once a week? You know, when a bipolar patient says that, you say, don't you even think about it. Every single day. That's how you need to do your meditation. So it was true. And the other thing about my experience with meditation is I wasn't one of these people who has an immediate effect. Some people do. My dear friend David Lynch says, when I first meditated, it was as though I was in an elevator, which you'd call here a lift, and somebody cut the cable, and I fell into bliss. Well, nothing like that happened to me. But what did happen to me is that when I was meditating for 4, 6, 8 weeks, all of a sudden, very curious things happened, because people would start saying things that previously would have offended me or I would have reacted to, and now I didn't feel that need. But well, that's kind of interesting, what this person's saying, and let me think about that. And so I became less reactive, less volatile, calmer. So I was older, I was more mature. I understood that you have to do something repeatedly in order to get benefit. I hadn't understood that years before. I really recognized that this was a very potent intervention, whereas when I was young I thought it was just for fun, which it really isn't. It's much more than that. And so I got the benefit, and so I still do it, and so I have this great joy in sharing that experience with other people.
How often do you do it every day?
I do it twice a day.
For how long?
For 20 minutes, just what you're supposed to do. Sometimes I miss, I try my best not to, but life sometimes gets a little out of hand, and when I miss it, I feel that absence. It's like I have lost a little bit of calmness, a little bit of tranquility, and so I try my very best not let that happen.
So for all these years, do you always use the same mantra?
Yes, you're given a mantra and you always use the same mantra. It's like you know, a very comfy chair that you love sitting in, and it becomes your favorite place to sit. Or maybe there's a bench in your garden or some special place. And the more you're there, the more special it becomes. And that's a little bit how it is with a mantra. Seem to resolve and take shape, creative little ideas come to mind. But sometimes you do what my friend David Lynch, the filmmaker, calls catching the big fish. Sometimes you catch a big fish. And that happened to him. Every once in a while, as I say, epiphanies can occur during a session. You may recall how David Lynch worked out key elements of his famous movie Mulholland Drive while meditating, how the ideas came to him like pearls on a string. You don't have to be a famous filmmaker, however, to have such an epiphany. A therapist colleague of mine, who's long dreamed of becoming a writer, has just begun to meditate, when during a session he went into a blissful state and emerged from it with a complete idea for a play in his mind. Over the hours that followed the session, he jotted down the skeleton of the play, which he continued to develop over the course of a year. A total novice, he went on to actually produce the play, something that would have been unthinkable to him before he began to meditate. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about meditation and TM in particular as a force for creativity. Besides something that's good for your heart, that can extend life, that can heal anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and other actual major mental illnesses, it can help all of us to self-actualize, to become the best that we can be. Now I'll move across to Winter Blues for a moment. And there again, you know, if anybody who's interested in finding out how to beat the winter blues, everything I've ever learned is in the pages of this book. But I'll only share a few things with you, because after you have mastered your biology, after you have figured out how to make yourself feel okay or better, that's when winter becomes fun. Let me read from this, called Winning My Own Battle with Winter. Winter no longer fills me with foreboding. All the evidence of its impending presence is still there in the world around me, the encroachment of dark at either end of the day like a rat nibbling away at a piece of cheese, the leaves turning color, the odd angle of the sun, but the feeling is different. There is a stirring inside me, a sense that this is what I've been waiting for, the winter, a wild frontier, alien and familiar as the wilderness, provoking me to react, create, survive, and triumph. Perhaps that is what it feels like to raft down the white waters of an untamed river, or scale a sheer cliff. I have no idea. I have never done either of these things and probably never will. No matter. Winter is adventure enough for me. And then I end the book talking about how I love to walk on a winter night. And the poet George Meredith captured that feeling of a winter night more brilliantly than anybody I ever knew in his poem, where he says, "Sharp is the night, but stars with frost alive leap off the rim of earth across the dome. It is a night to make the heavens our home. More than the nest whereto apace we strive. Lengths down our road each fir tree seems a hive, in swarms outrushing from the golden comb. They waken waves of thoughts that burst to foam. The darkness of the night is broken by the stars and the light of human habitation, street lights, incandescent lights, flickering television screens, computer terminals, and at the end of my walk, the bright, cheerful lights shining through the curtains of my own home. And as I return to the beginning again, I think of winter and its many, many facets. It has been a difficult season for me and so very many others. But in the difficulty, there is the opportunity to bring out what is best in each of us. Winter is a stimulus to creativity and to sharing the fruits of our creation with others. I write this book in that spirit, and if it brings you even a shaft of light on a winter's day, my mission has been accomplished. Thank you. And with other people as well. Now, I've been talking around London about how these things can heal, how they can make you better physically, how they can make you feel better psychologically, and I've detailed that in detail in my books. But I thought, since I was here in this creative hub of London, in this heart of this creative area, I would take a slightly different tack today and read just a few things about some very creative people, some of whom we all know about, and what meditation has meant to them. And then I thought I would just loop around and show how the winter and light can also be a force for creativity. So let me start with somebody known to all of us, and that is, of course, Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles, Sir Paul. And David Lynch, who's my friend and also a filmmaker, asked Paul McCartney, what is it that you got from India that was most valuable? And Paul said, getting a mantra from Maharishi and then learning how to use it. The rest is up to yourself. So actually, being given a mantra and being taught what to do with it was the most important aspect of the trip. The rest was great fun. He sums up the role that TM has played in his life since that auspicious visit, saying, in moments of madness, meditation has helped me find moments of serenity, and I would like to think that it would help provide young people a quiet haven in a not-so-quiet world. I think meditation offers a moment in your day to be at peace with yourself and therefore the universe, which once was thought of as a slightly silly hippie idea, but now it's much more accepted and even fits with some of the most advanced scientific thinking. So that was his thought, and Ringo Starr echoed it. He said, what meditation is for me is a moment to stop the thinking and let my heart come forward. That's how I always felt about it, because my thinking will drive me balmy. And he says it's a joy. You can always come back to it. And it's like a lot of things that are good for you. The more you do it, the better it is. Famous filmmaker Martin Scorsese is a meditator with TM, and I asked him, how does it affect your creativity? How does it make you more creative? He says, when I start to meditate, there are 1,000 thoughts which eventually settle down into a calm, floating space. It's an extraordinary experience. During a session, creative ideas come to mind. For example, intuiting a piece of music to use in a picture about George Harrison that he was working on for a long time, or thinking of running music and a voice over at the same time. Such details may be invisible to most moviegoers, but are crucial for a master filmmaker seeking exactly the right effect. And so it is. A friend of mine and very well-known actor, Russell Brand, talks about how he's felt since starting TM. And he's quite open that he has had trouble with addictions, that he now is in a wonderful recovery. But Russell has felt a fulfillment of sensory and psychological needs in a new way, and access to more basic transcendent experiences in his daily life. He acknowledges having always had a wish to stimulate himself, which is common in many people with a history of addictions. He says that in the past he's not been a great self-observer. He is pleased to find that now he has an extra moment of reflection before yielding to anger, lust, and what he calls primal animalistic urges.